Welcome to week 2 of our Going Backstage series. And this week, we're going to discuss the history of John Wesley and the Methodist Church, which is our history. But we're also going to explore why the church is important in the first place. Why is our history important? How did we get here? And this is the week that everyone probably is going to get super excited about, because who doesn't love history? Now listen, maybe you love history. Maybe your jam is reading books on World War I submarines, and more power to you if that's who you are. But for the rest of us, history isn't exactly our favorite topic. For a lot of us, our perspective is, it's done, it's over with, let's move on with our lives. I tried to take that perspective for much of my academic career, but in fact, when I finally realized that learning our history was important, it changed me because it helped me see my faith in a new way. So that's what we're going to do today. So why is our history important? Because it creates a sense of shared belonging. So when we discuss things like psychology, we recognize that we are products of our history and our upbringing. We carry with us our past, for better or for worse. So our understanding our history helps us come to terms with who we are and where we want to go. But it also offers some insight for us to understand why it is who we are. Okay, so to kick things off, we have to have a discussion on us, our background, and our history. We are part of the Christian faith, and that means we are part of an organization, a club, that dates back for about 2,000 years. But truthfully, it dates back even further than that. Starting with Scripture, we had a guy by the name of Abraham who would become Abraham. And through Abraham, God established a covenant wherein he promises to offer salvation to humanity. What's important for us to recognize with that is that we can trace our lineage back to the earliest known covenant that God made with humanity. Humanity would then break the rules that God had given them over and over and over, and eventually things would go from bad to worse. And then Jesus comes, he's God incarnate, and he saves the day, and everything is awesome again. And it kicks off the creation of the church in the book of Acts, where Jesus tells his earliest followers to go out and to baptize others in the name of Christ. And this brings us to where we are today. In a sense, we gloss over about 4,000 years of history there, but it's fine. Rewinding a little bit, though, we're going to go back to the 18th century, where we find the Wesley brothers. The Wesley brothers are the sons of Samuel and Susanna Wesley. They are 2 of the 19 children that Sam and Susanna had. 19. Even in death, I think we ought to pray for Susanna Wesley and all that she must have endured with those kids. Now, Samuel Wesley was an Anglican priest, and Susanna was just as awesome, and if not more awesome and amazing woman than her husband, despite the fact that she was the one married to the clergyman. She was the actual spiritual leader of her household. Most of us can agree that women are, in fact, the real brains of just about any operation, and they were no exception. 2 of their kids were John and Charles Wesley. And they had these pivotal moments, including one time where their house caught fire and John was trapped inside and was rescued by neighbors. And in these pivotal moments in their history, they came to understand how it is that the world around them was influencing them to see God in their everyday actions. Charles and John were both very smart kids. They would go on to Oxford to study religion. While they were there, they started this thing which was called the Holy Club, which admittedly was a bit of a pretentious name on their part, naming themselves the Holy Club. But be that as it may, they wanted to be a club that tried to live a holy life, which is a great way for them to make an impact and influence people around them, because they were just trying to live differently. And they became so tempered and methodical into their approach to faith that this is how they came up with the term Methodist. And this is how the term Methodist began to be thrown around. It became a signature phrase for John Wesley, and they would go on to have these great moments of faith as they developed over the years. So first you have John Wesley. Now the reason why John Wesley is so important is not because we worship him like he's some sort of saint or deity of the church. Like, we don't think that he is so great and he is beyond flawed. The man had a lot of problems and a lot of flaws. But what we recognize is that there are a whole host of different ways that we can engage in our faith and understand theology. And in fact, to this day, scholars are introducing new theological frameworks that offer insight into how we can interpret Scripture and understand God's interaction with the world. What this means for us, and the reason we say that we are Wesleyan, is because we believe in the Wesleyan school of thought when it comes to theology. This particular school of thought is important for us because what we see is this same mentality in other areas, such as if you're a Keynesian economist or Freudian psychologist. It doesn't mean that you worship those individuals. It just means that they have provided, in your opinion, the best framework and understanding for your particular field of study. Wesley tried to take Christianity back to the roots, in a sense. He looked back at all the schools of thought over 1,800 years, and he saw places where he believed they got it right. And what he worked to do is to bring all those places together, and that is how he began the Wesleyan movement. Now, some history before that. In 1736, John was on his way to Georgia to work at Christ Church, where he was a young, brash preacher. But he didn't really have a good faith yet. And he was on this ship in a storm where he was being watched over by these Moravians. And while he was with them, he saw this sense of calm and peace in the midst of the storm, and he realized it was because of their faith. And Peter Böhler, a man from the Moravians, would look at him and tell him that what it meant for him is that he needed to continue to preach faith until one day he would have it himself. And so that's what he went and did. He went and began to preach faith until one day he had it himself, and then he began to preach it from a more earnest perspective. And it's from that perspective that you realize that John Wesley did some things that maybe weren't the best, like this one time where he refused to offer communion to a woman he had a crush on because she didn't want to, date him and marry him, which is a horrible story, admittedly funny, but it is the story. Now, in 1738, he would have what is known as the Aldersgate experience, where, while on his way to Aldersgate for church service that he didn't want to go to, he felt his heart strangely warmed by God. From that point onward, he was preaching with a new reinvigoration about what it meant to have faith and what that faith could mean for others. So take a moment in your groups, discuss kind of these early principles of the history of the church and the history of what John Wesley had done and what you might see for that in your lives today. Well, welcome back. So we talked about John Wesley, but now we need to talk about Charles. Charles Wesley wrote many hymns, and when I say many, I mean he wrote like all of them. He wrote "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing," "Love divine, all loves excelling," and "Hark the herald angels sing." He is widely regarded as the most prolific hymn writer in history. And not just in Wesleyan circles. I mean like all of it. He's like the James Patterson of hymn writing. Now, oddly enough, he wasn't really writing songs or hymns. He was writing poetry about faith. John Wesley would then take that poetry, find a musical piece that it worked well with, and pair them together. And 300 years later, we're singing the renditions of those songs to this day. Because Charles, our church ancestors, actually understood what singing could be. Charles was writing pieces that would help people grow in their faith in easy and understandable ways. And we'll get to that a little bit more in depth here in a little bit. But their movement and their theology gained attraction by engaging people in rural communities where they had the opportunity to access material that had never been presented to them, and hymns were a perfect way to do this. So they put together catchy jingles with concepts of theology, and they would stick in people's heads, and these became critical teachings that people would carry alongside with them, and they became a mode of distribution for theology in a church movement. Now, for Wesleyanism, which is the underpinning of the Methodist Church, as well as several other denominations, many of which share the word Methodist in their name, such as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and some that don't, such as the Nazarene Church and the Holiness Movement. What Wesley did, alongside Arminianism, was try to take things back to the beginning. Let's understand the good and the bad and take the good from all the sides. There was this movement back in that day called the Protestant Reformation, which began with Martin Luther. And he decided to begin this movement on Halloween, where he did effectively a reverse trick-or-treating, where he went and delivered something on somebody's doorstep. Specifically, he delivered a treatise to the door of the Catholic diocese, effectively calling them out and creating the split of the Protestants from the Catholics. He basically nailed an elaborate breakup letter to the church, which was the most impressive public breakup letter since probably 1776, when Jefferson wrote a rather scathing breakup letter himself to the British Empire. In reality, he was, one, a loyalist to the Church of England, which doesn't work if the colony split from England. And two, he was very opposed to slavery, which was sort of this thing that colonists had become known for. And he was calling out the colonists for being hypocritical, saying, how are you going to say that England is enslaving you when you've literally have slaves in your own backyard? This is effectively how he kind of broke with America when it began the American Revolution. Now, the Protestants really went full throttle on this whole split from the Catholic Church thing. And Martin Luther sort of threw the theological and ecclesiological baby out with the bathwater, if I can use a rather horrifying idiom. They claimed that pretty much anything and everything that the Catholic Church had ever done was wrong. And John Wesley came along a couple hundred years later and said, whoa, we really took that a little bit too far. Like, look at all the good that the Catholic Church had done. They're not perfect. They haven't done everything right, but they got some things right. And he did this because he was Anglican, which was a hybrid model of theologies that were really based on the Catholic Church. Now, ultimately, John realized that there were great things such as liturgies and traditions of the church, which united people with God, as well as the theologies of grace that didn't line up with the Anglican or Catholic faith. And he put all these things together, and he started preaching his own sermons. He started going around and he started preaching his understanding of God, the tenets of which we'll get into over the next couple of weeks. And he found success in the Americas before the Revolution, where this was a mostly rural community of farmers. And he would go from town to town on horseback and give sermons and teach songs. And he would set up in those towns these things that were called societies of people, where you could be a literal card-carrying member. Like they had membership cards and everything. Like it was the 1990s for clubs for youth of America. Inside those societies, which were very large and took up large reasons, were classes. And these classes were about 15 to 20 people. And they would meet and they would do things like Bible study and do life together. And then there were small groups inside of those classes. And inside of those, you'd have those small groups of 5 to 6 people, and they would be kind of accountability groups where they would confess sins and they would hold each other accountable to one another. They were living out the first covenant groups. John had all this success because he was reaching people on the outskirts in ways that had never been done before, and he was doing so with a basic philosophical and moral living that was founded in Scripture. First things first, he said we ought to do no harm. Like you can't do bad things to people. And he includes his instructions not to use too many words of buying or selling, which I think is funny of a way in which we do harm. But then we had to do good. Literally, we have to go and do good and things for people and to love them and care for them. And then we have to attend to the ordinances of God, which is things like worshiping and praying and reading Scripture. And if you did these things, John Wesley was arguing that you would inherently live a Christian life. Now, eventually, the movement starts to take off in America. And we start ordaining new bishops in the area and new preachers, including women, which was a monumental moment in the history of the larger Christian church and something we still emphatically celebrate today because we believe women can be some of the most incredible preachers and pastoral leaders we could have. When the colonies split from England, it further drove the movement away from the Church of England, away from the Anglican Church, and they eventually became their own denomination here in America. And what's important for us to remember, and what I want to leave you with, is Wesley was never trying to start a new church. He wasn't that guy. He believed in the Anglican Church of England. He was just trying to enhance it a bit. And he was trying to provide people an opportunity to worship God in ways that they hadn't done before. But what ended up happening were people were beginning to engage in their faith in a way that had never been done before in history. And it was why it resonated so well. So as we close out this lesson on history, we want you to go back to your groups, answer some more questions, and it's our hope that you'll have the opportunity to express why understanding this history lesson a little bit deeper has actually enhanced your faith altogether.